Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Better Buildings for Humans podcast. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the show where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, our general joy of being alive. And of course, we always talk about sustainability, sustainable design as well. Today, I want to introduce you to Cory Boudreau from the SLAM Collaborative. Cory, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here.
Yeah, hello, Joe. It's great for having me. Thanks. It's great to be here.
We've been chatting for a while, so I'm glad we finally get a chance to do this.
Yeah.
Cory, before we go any further, what we want to do is we want to let our listeners get to know you a little better. So, tell us why you chose architecture as a career, and then tell us about the road, the pathway that led you to your current position with the SLAM Collaborative.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a bit of a winding road to get here. I'd say growing up, I was always into drawing buildings, building Lego. I always loved art and building things. So naturally, architecture became my passion. I got my undergrad here at New England Tech, and then I worked at a small firm for a couple of years before deciding to pursue my master's degree. I got my master's degree at Massachusetts College of Art and Design. It was a great program there, and being that it's an art school, really surrounded and exposed to all different forms of art and inspiration. So it left a big impact on me. After graduating, I worked at a few other firms in Rhode Island before deciding I wanted to really get into some bigger, more complex projects. And I felt like the market here wasn't doing it in sort of, 2018, 2019, before the big boom. So my wife had some family in Charlotte. And so we went down to check it out, and I left with a few offers there, and we decided we were packing up and ready for an adventure. So I ended up starting at MPS, McMillan, Pazin & Smith, a few months later with their healthcare team, and I got what I was looking for in terms of bigger and more complex projects. I started on a 12-phase hospital expansion that had multiple enabling projects. We moved a street. There was a 100,000 square foot inpatient bed tower. And this all ended up being over COVID, remote, with a team that had never worked together. So
Right.
it was an experience for sure. But ultimately, I knew healthcare wasn't really the practice area that I was passionate about. And so fortunately, this connection got me the role on the North Charleston Key Summit Library. This is another valuable learning experience I really enjoyed. And then as I was finishing up the drawings for that, I ended up starting in the K-12 practice area and really just dove right in. Again, I had worked on K-12 projects in the past, but these were much larger and more complex. And I picked it up quick. And the more I did, the more interest I grew. I started to research school design and 21st century learning spaces. And I was reviewing any plans, anything I could find to really improve design, collaboration, and student engagement. And then while discovering this passion for K-12, my wife and I welcomed our two children, and seeing the ways that they grow and how they experience different spaces really makes me think about the spaces we design even more. So, because, us as school designers, we're really shaping their future.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that a lot. Oh, sorry, you keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. And so sort of the final bit is, fast forward bit, we're back in Rhode Island. This is something we had talked about since my daughter was born, because family is just really super important to us. Last year, we lost a couple of family members unexpectedly. And with family getting older and health conditions changing, we really wanted to be closer to family and enjoy this time together. And I had followed SLAM for a bit. I had a friend in the Providence office, and she let me know there was a position open. I interviewed, and it all worked out. And so here I am.
Here you are, and congratulations on being where your soul wants to be. That's a beautiful thing. I have to make a comment. Almost every architect that I've interviewed on this show has mentioned Legos. It's like such a remarkable toy, and a lot of kids play with Legos, but the kids that the Legos grabbed and wouldn't let go,
Yeah.
a lot of them became architects. Isn't that an interesting pathway and so common?
Yeah.
Did you go at Lego? Sorry, I got to go down
Yeah,
this hole just a
yeah.
little tiny bit. But when you're probably too young to remember, but let's take a shot anyway. When you played with Legos as a kid, was it different than the way the other kids played with Legos? Like the other kids were making blocks and you were making towers and bridges, and
Yeah, I
did you
mean,
feel?
so, I think I was definitely building more like houses and things. We had all the sets, and I would say big shout out to my grandmother who was huge, like always getting us Legos. She would go to the Lego store and purchase like full like bags of every brick you can find. Me and all my cousins, brothers, we would just build. And so she had built us quite the collection that, I still have a lot of those at the house that my kids have started to play with, and it just became a big important part of our family culture as well. So
That's really cool. All right. I know you're relatively new with Slam. I know MPS well. We've got a guest from MPS coming in a couple of weeks, I'm pretty sure. You're relatively new, but you've worked in K to 12. You've done a lot of work in K to 12. Let's talk about that for a bit. Can you share an example of a project or an initiative that you were part of that successfully combines sustainability and occupant health? And what made that project stand out for you?
yeah, so I'd say the last project that I worked on in the Southeast at MPS was the Fort Mill Middle School project. I had posted about that sort of right before I left. This was a significant project for MPS for many reasons. One of which was it was the pilot program for, testing new sustainability software, developing standard processes for designing better and more sustainable projects moving forward. Helped to develop the worksheet that would be filled out on each project, tracking metrics for the built environment, site, and in context. Right around the time that this project had started, MPS had signed the 2030 agreement. So it was important to sort of develop this strategy to help tracking those required metrics for the 2030 goal. And then I would say at Slam, I haven't had much involvement with them, but I have a sort of somewhat of an understanding of the team here. And so Slam has a green team that is involved with helping develop sustainable strategies for projects, researching products and other technology. And then recently they decided they were going to integrate at least one green team member onto each team to really start to build more of a unified front on sustainable practices and within the firm.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Right. All right. I want to talk about the regulatory environment just a little bit. Okay. Just a little bit, I promise. What would you say are some of the most effective tools, regulatory tools, or incentives
Yeah.
that you've seen local and governments use to encourage green and healthy school design or building
Yeah.
design in general?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say the Northeast is really driven to building green schools. So most of the states here use the Northeast Collaborative for High Performing Schools protocol, and that's sort of the standard, and that sets the standards for daylighting, energy, et cetera. And that's sort of based on the 2018 Energy Code. And so Rhode Island Public Schools has really pushed projects to use 30% less energy, 20% less water. They've diverted 50% less waste to landfills, construction waste to landfills. And then you have like Connecticut and Massachusetts, and they bump things up even further into go into the 2021 Energy Code and the Massachusetts School Building Authority. They have incentive points to push things even further than that. So they have incentive points to exceed the base code energy efficiency by 20%. So they're giving out more money for better schools, which is really causing a shift. And there's a growing number of net zero schools throughout the state. I mean, Massachusetts is number one in education throughout the country. So,
Right.
it's really important to them. And then I'd say for sort of federal government wise, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed by President Biden had numerous incentives for solar, geothermal, and other green systems. But the process for that is a little bit lengthy. And with the changing administration, I'm not sure sort of how any of those will be capitalized on yet.
Right on. So, two questions come out of that for me. Is Rhode Island following Massachusetts with their stretch goals, or are you not quite going there?
I am not sure yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're mostly doing work in Rhode Island following the New England chips. So,
Okay. The second one is you mentioned 50% less construction waste going to landfill. That's extraordinary. Can you give me any idea what sort of things people are doing to achieve that? Because that's incredible.
I'm not sure. Actually, that statistic came from
Okay.
the Rhode Island Department of Education website, which I was pretty shocked to see that as well as I was researching this. So,
I
I
need to
mean,
do a show on that. I need
yeah,
to do a show on that. I need to find somebody from Rhode Island to talk to about that because
yeah,
that's incredible. Like that's
yeah,
got to be shared and the methodologies have got to be shared. There's people that can learn from that for sure.
yeah,
Let's talk about my favorite subject. Let's make it about me for a little while. Just kidding. My favorite subject is daylighting for
yeah.
sure. So tell me, how much care, how much effort, is taken to ensure that students, faculty, staff are exposed to ample amounts of natural sunlight in school projects? And you can go back to MPS or what you've
Yeah.
learned with SLAM
I
so
mean,
far.
yeah, I mean, in either firm, I think for here specifically, I mean, the any chips regulatory standards, set a high bar for natural light and ventilation in classrooms. I mean, this includes operable windows, like that's a requirement within this region. A lot of care is taken to natural light. There's benefits throughout. And so different spaces are treated differently. You treat a classroom different than sort of the larger spaces throughout the building, your media center, your gym, your theater. We consider orientation. Glare is another big topic that's really got to be considered with all the smart boards and technology throughout the classrooms. Glazing treatments such as frits and solar shades, light shelves, and then to sort of tie it all together, controls is another really big topic in terms of the daylighting, reducing that load, understanding the artificial light and how it's affecting the space altogether.
Right on. You and I will have to talk offline sometime about diffusion as a tool, just one more tool in your toolbox. But it's good to hear that it's a priority. It really is great to hear that it's a priority. I spent a lot of years in the wilderness screaming about, well, there was a bunch of us, but we were all in the wilderness screaming about daylighting while people were kind of going, what? Why is that
Yeah.
important? Okay, let's talk about other design features. What other design features can be included to improve learning and well-being in K to 12 schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think, bringing it back to that natural light and acoustics and ventilation, I think those can really have a big impact on learning. The studies are showing academic improvement of 15 to 25% if you sort of encapsulate all these things, depending on the baseline. I think in terms of spaces that you could include, we're seeing a big shift from direct instruction to more project-based learning. And so this is more student focused, student centered. Teachers are becoming more facilitators and guide, and there's more of an emphasis on collaboration. And so with that, the spaces that are needed are sort of larger gathering spaces, larger collaboration and breakout spaces for group work with writable surfaces, flexible furniture, those kind of things. And then, you have these bigger, larger spaces for groups that can maybe accommodate 2, 3 classes in there. So the group work is happening all together. And then you break it down to sort of smaller group rooms where you can have sort of more focused chats, informal chats, mentoring, those kind of things happening. And then to break it down even further, sort of the individual level, finding more quiet zones and spaces for reflection for students to help them sort of allow them to refocus during the day.
I can't believe that we've become that forward thinking. That's magical
Yeah.
to hear that those
Yeah.
things are happening. I mean, I grew up in the day where you sat your ass in the chair,
Yeah.
sit down, stop, just watch what I'm doing on the chalkboard.
Yeah, yeah. And so these shifts are really giving students a chance to kind of explore real world problems and better prepare them for the future. Because, the methodologies that existed back in the day when I went to school or when you went to school, they're more factory based, they're
Right.
more 9 to 5 and the world's changing rapidly. So we got to prepare kids to learn how to learn.
So let's talk about that a little bit then. I mean, you've got kids that, learn at different paces, have different learning styles, have different levels of self-confidence, those sorts of things. What sort of design accommodations do you make for the fact that everybody's a little different? That's a pretty
Yeah, and I
generic question, but let's take a shot.
yeah. I mean, I would say creating a variety of spaces throughout the school to accommodate those different learning environments. Within the classroom, you could have different furniture setups. You could have sort of more pod spaces, group spaces, individual desks, the group spaces. And so, I mean, there's different ways to get around that. I mean, I think throughout the school, creating spaces for students to stop, for students to gather, involvement in, outdoor spaces, whatever it comes up.
Okay, let's look towards the future. What are some of the exciting trends and innovations that you see that are going to shape the future of school design?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the world and how it's changed since COVID, I think there's a lot of changes happening to the built environment, and there's more thought on the spaces we're in and how they make us feel. And I think schools are no different. I think one of the big topics that everyone's been talking about more recently, and I know you've had guests on to talk about, is sort of trauma informed design,
Yep.
creating those safe, calm spaces, a lot of visual transparency. This can help to increase security, and that there's early studies show that these even minor distractions. I know that there's a lot of school districts that are worried about glazing in classrooms, and oh, the students are going to get distracted, but the studies are showing that even those minor distractions don't lower focus or performance. And then the inclusion of biophilic design, whether that be colors, textures, or even natural elements in the school, can really help to bring better performance. And then, yeah, there's the shift to move away from these long hallways, boxy classrooms, to create more fluid, playful layouts that kind of mimic the world environments. Then you got tech integration and design. These are go well beyond smart boards in the classrooms, designing infrastructure for one-to-one devices, so giving each kid their own device. Maker spaces are another big thing that's happening. VR labs. We're seeing a lot of esports labs popping up. Sports is becoming quite the thing with Twitch.
Right.
So, and then audio and visual recording studios. Kids are starting their own podcast, they're doing their own thing. And then the last thing I would say in terms of trends is really the component of outdoor learning. COVID really accelerated this, but it's kind of sticking around. Like it's becoming more of an essential piece of the school design overall.
Okay, so I love the outdoor learning thing. Let's run with that for just a second. How are outdoor spaces being incorporated into school design? Like, what are the physical aspects of what you're actually doing to encourage that or to support that?
Yeah. I mean, I would say for sure these outdoor spaces and incorporating play and activities into spaces is proven to increase learning. So that's probably why they're sticking around and become the focus. I would say the first is probably outdoor classrooms. That's the given, just taking the space outside. And these are kind of these can just be simple, defined spaces with seating and a focal point for the teacher. They can be anywhere on the site. You can upgrade them with some shade structures, movable, writable surfaces, or digital whiteboards. You can bring you can have Wi-Fi installed outside, power data outside, so you just wheel a board out there, and then it's truly sort of a classroom outside. Next, I'd say is sort of the courtyard and gathering spaces, areas for students and faculty to gather, eat, and escape the building for the day. That Fort Mill Middle School project was designed around a real central courtyard with a lot of visual transparency for security. It included an outdoor classroom, seating area for kids to sit and eat. It's right off the cafeteria. There were art labs right off there, so the art classes could go out. It's really a multifunctional space. Then I'd say you could include traditional garden spaces, flowers, vegetables, fruits, vegetables, plants, those kind of things. Those could be really used in conjunction with CTE programs like culinary and agriculture. And then really depending on the site, you could really incorporate natural elements like streams and trails, or you can do hands-on experiments or natural playscapes outside of your sort of typical playground structures. And then I'd say lastly is the sustainability aspect. Rain gardens, composting areas, solar panel installations, a great way to, teach the level of sustainability at the building level.
Right. So let's talk about seasons just a little bit. You're in the Northeast, so
Yep.
yeah. So you have to design with, the expectation that there's going to be 2 feet of snow on top of whatever you design outside for some portion
Yeah.
of the year. Is that add significant complexity, or is that a minor adjustment?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely adds some complexity. There's definitely a requirement for more covered areas, but if you're using southern facing areas, you have the sunlight component in there to heat up the area. You can provide heaters. It's really about being out there. It's feeling the breeze. It's seeing the sunlight outside of the building.
Right. Okay.
So,
Right.
and the South Kingstown High School project here in Rhode Island that we're just finished up, we're concluding like butterfly gardens outside of the theater space.
Oh,
There's gathering space for students near the bus drop off, those kind of things. So students will use them whether there's snow or not.
gotcha. Right. And sometimes it's even more fun in the snow.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just some of the teaching tools you might just not, you can't roll out the smartboard
yep,
in January.
Solar heat gain doesn't have to be a design challenge. Solera translucent glazing units help architects create buildings that not only work better, but feel better, balancing light, comfort, and energy efficiency. Discover how to design higher value spaces without compromise at advancedglazings.com.
Right. Okay. So let's take a moment and talk about what we all can do. Right.
yep,
We've left it in the hands of the legislators. We've left it in the hands of designers. Let's give some advice to our listeners, whether they're professional, community champions, homeowners, whoever. What's one action, even just one, but if you've got two or three, I'll take it,
yeah.
that they can take today to help advance healthier and more sustainable buildings in their own neighborhood?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the first thing is, a lot of these energy companies are offering free or low cost energy audits of homes and community buildings. I'd say sort of understanding your baseline is the first step to sort of understanding how you can improve.
Right.
You could plant some trees, advocate or install solar panels. You could work with your local government to develop more green space or play areas, volunteer or organize street or neighborhood cleanup. That's a big thing. Fort Mill had a great program that they would do every other Saturday. They would supply the trash bags, pickers, people, gloves for people to go pick up trash around the neighborhoods.
Right on.
And then I'd say something that's not necessarily a today action, but obviously important is voting. Voting is critical. I mean, voting for school bonds helps get schools, higher performance. Voting for better politicians. I mean, there's a lot of politicians that have lost touch with their constituents and, they don't necessarily care about improving their lives. So it would be good to find some new folks.
That's universal.
Yes.
That's universal for sure. You mentioned trees and you mentioned the green spaces. I had a guest very early on in the show, Dr. Alstan Jakubiec from the University of Toronto, and he'd done a lot of work on urban heat islands and explored multiple techniques that are being discussed today for minimizing the impact of urban heat islands. And he found that the only technique that worked, the only one, was green space.
Yep.
Was leaving some green space between the skyscrapers, between the massive amounts of concrete. And that methodology facilitated cooling much better than any of those sort of sophisticated techniques, the reflective techniques, all the other things that they were trying to do. Just leave some green space. And the kids love the green space. They want the green space.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I mean, living outside of Charlotte, the difference between being in the city and being sort of near like one of the greenways within Fort Mill, the temperature was significantly different. Like
Right.
we're talking 5 degrees
Yep.
at times.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, green space is super important for neighborhoods, super important for cities. So,
yeah, love it. I'm a big fan. All right. We've reached the point in the show where I ask my $1 million question. I ask it of every guest, and I ask the guest to answer it from whatever perspective you'd like. Okay, here it comes. Cory, what makes a great building?
yeah, I'd say what makes a great building is a building that you want to come back to. It's a building that brings you a sense of comfort and well-being and even inspiration at times. It's designed with a focus for human experience and functionality while being beautiful.
That's beautiful and concise, but I'm going to go deeper because
Okay.
I can't leave you alone with inspiration, a
Yeah.
building that's inspiring. How do you set out, when someone puts a project in front of you and says, okay, we're designing a middle school in uh, Providence, just on the outskirts of Providence. How do you sit down and say, I want the people who visit the school to be inspired? And I know that's an extremely difficult question, but give me some sort of, what goes through your mind when you know that part of your role is to inspire?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's scale of space. It depends on the scale of the space. It depends on the materiality. I mean, we're doing a lot of like incorporation of wood elements. It's the biophilic design. It's the daylighting. It's making sure you have these levels of detail that people can really pick up on.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that. All right. Before we go, Cory, do you have any exciting news, any big news that you'd like to share?
Not really. I will say the South Kingston High School here in Rhode Island, it has the upcoming groundbreaking, and that'll be exciting to come out of the ground. Getting to really know my position here at SLAM, I'll be becoming sort of market lead within the Providence office here. So, big things in the future.
Oh, fantastic. Well, someday we'll have to have you back on again after you've got a few projects under your belt with Slam in Rhode Island, and we'll have another conversation because I'm sure you'll have discovered some really interesting things between now and then.
Yeah, that would be great.
Cory, thank you so much for making the time to do this. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, great talking with you.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.